In the early 1850s, a small South Carolina creek became the site of a surprisingly modern conflict: private enterprise versus public rights. On one side were small-scale sawmill owners who depended on free-flowing waterways to move their lumber to market. On the other, a rising class of industrial capitalists, led by William Gregg, who were willing to challenge decades of legal precedent to protect large-scale manufacturing. This isn't just a story about one dam on one creek. It's about how the Antebellum South handled tensions between its agrarian roots and the pressures of industrial capitalism. South Carolina's riparian laws, those governing the use of rivers and streams, were designed to balance private profit with public access. The 1825 Act, the most important of these laws, said that if a waterway was used for navigation, boats, rafts, or timber, you could build a dam, but you had to provide a passage for the traffic. This made sense in a state where the rivers were the main transportation network into the interior. It ensured that no one landowner could monopolize a stream for private use at the expense of others. It was also a way of maintaining a public commons mindset in a society still dominated by small-scale slaveholding farmers and millers. By the mid-19th century, districts like Edgefield and Barnwell were dotted with sawmills, over 120 of them. Most were owned by planters who also worked their land with enslaved labor. These men of property built their wealth from land and slaves, with sawmilling as a secondary business. They were entrepreneurial, but within the familiar framework of plantation agriculture. Their political and economic world was built on reciprocity, shared access to natural resources, and legislative protection for small-scale enterprise. Then came William Gregg. Born in 1800, Gregg worked his way up from jeweler to merchant and then to industrialist. In 1845, he founded the Graniteville Manufacturing Company, capitalized at $300,000, a huge sum at that time. The factory complex included a granite dam, 2 massive water turbines, and 9,000 spindles turning out cotton goods on an industrial scale. Gregg rejected slave labor, hiring poor white workers instead, and built an entire company town with housing, schools, and strict moral rules. This was industrial capitalism, complete with regimented work schedules, in the heart of a slaveholding agricultural society. Graniteville's dam sat on Horse Creek, a stream the legislature had declared navigable back in 1820. That meant Gregg was legally required to allow timber rafts through his dam. For the small sawmill owners upstream, this was vital. For Gregg, it was a threat. Any upstream miller could demand access or sue him for blocking the creek. Gregg understood that his factories essentially depended on control of the waterway. What he needed wasn't just a court victory, it was a change in the law itself. In 1853, Gregg and his ally James Jones, the owner of the Vaucluse mill upstream, petitioned the South Carolina legislature. They argued that shoals above Graniteville made navigation impossible anyway, so the law shouldn't apply. Their opponents, smaller mill owners, warned that this wasn't just about one creek, it was about the state abandoning a long-standing principle that waterways belong to everyone. If Gregg could get an exemption, then large manufacturers could reshape public law to serve their private interest. Gregg's strategy was part of a broader shift in 19th century America, where corporate capital sought and often obtained changes in the legal landscape to protect large-scale investment. This wasn't just industrial growth, it was industrialists rewriting the rules. Gregg won. The legislature passed a new act that redefined navigable streams and carved out an exemption for Horse Creek above a certain point. That exemption allowed Graniteville to keep its dam closed to timber rafts, effectively privatizing that section of the creek. This was a clear departure from the old Jeffersonian vision of economic life in South Carolina. It marked a legal and political tilt toward accommodating large-scale manufacturing, even at the expense of small producers and long-standing public rights. The Horse Creek case reveals several key points about the Antebellum South. 1. Industrial capitalism was emergent. Even in a slaveholding economy, industrialists like Gregg were creating new forms of wealth and new kinds of labor systems. 2. The law could shift. Decades of precedent protecting public waterways could be overturned when capital and political influence aligned. 3. Tensions were structural. This wasn't just a personality clash, it reflected a deeper conflict between men whose wealth came from land and slaves versus men whose wealth came from pooled capital and industrial production. Horse Creek's story reminds us that economic change often begins with legal change. Gregg's victory wasn't simply a win for one factory. It was a sign that the South, even before the Civil War, could and did adapt its legal traditions to protect industrial capital. Whether that adaptation represented progress or the erosion of public rights depends on how you see the balance between private enterprise and the common good. I'm Dr. Lucas Wilder. This is History Gone Wilder, and I'll see you next time.